Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. Viewers, America's deadline to Iran may end in a few hours from now. But Donald Trump is waiting for no deadline. It's raining missiles in Iran already, and Iran has made it clear that they are not considering any negotiations at the moment. From the strategic Kharg island to even civilian infrastructure, America has decided to escalate the war to an unprecedented level. President Trump just took to social media to warn Iran earlier today, where he says a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran, unquote. Now, here are some of the locations that have been struck in just the last few hours. We're looking at the absolute strike that has taken place in Tehran, where the Sharak al-Gharab district has been hit. In Kharg Island, military targets have been attacked. In Kashan area, a railway bridge has been attacked as well. In the Qazvin area, railway infrastructure has been hit, and in Kharg, railway infrastructure damaged here as well. In Hashtag, the railway bridge to Tabriz has been hit as well. Now, these strikes follow a warning that Donald Trump had given Iran just a few hours earlier. What did he say? He had very clearly specified that there was, in fact, a threat as far as Iran is concerned, and that the deadline of 8 p.m. that is to take place in just a few hours from now will be when there would be complete devastation. Let's listen into that.
The entire country could be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night. The entire country could be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night.
Now, Iran's critical energy lifeline, the Kharg Island, has also been struck by the United States. So far, America has struck the military installations on Kharg Island. Remember that this is Iran's crown jewel of oil infrastructure, and Kharg Island handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. It's also considered Iran's economic lifeline, and an attack anywhere near these oil terminals could destabilize oil exports and further hurt global oil markets. Let's quickly get you a quick breaking update as well. Russia and China have vetoed a watered-down UN resolution aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. This is the latest update coming in, where Russia and China have both vetoed a watered-down UN resolution aimed at the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take this across to Mayank, who's joining us live at the moment. Mayank, very significant that there's an attempt to take this to the United Nations Security Council, but clearly it is Russia and China who've managed to veto this move on part of the US.
After 38 days, at least 39 days, we are able to hear of something like UN, because it was expected that lots of things and statements might come before. But let's go to the resolution itself. 11 have favored this resolution authored by Bahrain. And talking about Strait of Hormuz, definitely whatever is happening there is costing the world over. I mean, things and shadows are casting their negative effects on the world. And going by the way the things are moving, two words which are most exploited in this case are deadline and ceasefire. And no end we see on anything. But as we are waiting, and lots of people must have been a bit waiting for with a bated breath, is 5:30 for morning tomorrow. And in that case, let us see, because Iran has said, and it is time again proving that it continues to, and in its ambit comes the entire region, and it is also further going to retaliate in terms of striking multiple facilities and infrastructures, which will further exacerbate the problem of fuel energy security for the world over, because exports come from that region only.
So what will Trump do? That's something we're going to be watching very closely. Mayank will be joining us early morning tomorrow with our team of reporters, experts and guests to take us through exactly what happens at 5:30 in the morning Indian Standard Time. But Iran doesn't appear to be in any mood to back down. In fact, Iran is now eyeing yet another energy choke point for the world. While the world is still reeling under the impact of the restricted access to the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is now preparing to shut down the Bab el-Mandab Strait as well. Here's what could happen next if that does in fact take place. What is it that Iran can do? It can involve the pro-Iran Houthi rebels based in Yemen, where Houthis have recently threatened to target the strait. There have been past instances as well, where Houthis have disrupted transit during the Gaza war in 2023, where vessels linked to Israel were targeted in Houthi attacks. Vessels were struck by missiles, drones, as well as explosive boats in all these situations. So it's not just, in fact, the Strait of Hormuz, but in fact that area that you see blinking, the Red Sea, where also the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where there could be action on part of Iran. Now, the closure of a second strait could have severe ramifications for the country. Now, here's why India is also watching the situation quite closely. Clearly, as far as India is concerned, the Strait of Hormuz is a pathway for 40% of the crude for India. India receives 90% of LPG via the Hormuz Strait and transits 70 to 80% of oil and LNG to the entire Asia from this area. Now, when it comes to the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, this accounts for 14% of global maritime trade. It's a major transit route for 5% of global oil produced and is a transit route for 80% of Indian merchandise to the EU as well. There's one more breaking update coming in at the moment. White House has denied all speculation around the possibility of using nuclear weapons against Iran. Interestingly, this clarification comes just hours after what US Vice President J.D. Vance said on the unused American toolkit.
They've got to know we've got tools in our toolkit that we so far haven't decided to use. The President of the United States can decide to use them, and he will decide to use them if the Iranians don't change their course of conduct.
You're watching the News Hour at 10.
Let's take us across to our guest. Joining us is Lt Gen DP Pandey, who's a defense expert. We have Richard Painter, law professor at the University of Minnesota and former chief White House ethics lawyer for President George Bush. We have Dr. Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, who's a director of the House of Diplomacy of the Diplo House Iran. We also have James Marlow, foreign and defense analyst with us. And Janatan Sayeh is a research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy is with us. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. And let me start first and foremost with James Marlow. James Marlow, now we understand that Vice President Trump has said that this is a military victory. We also understand that President Trump has said that this will be the end of Iranian civilization. At the same time, you have Marco Rubio saying that there will not be any use of nuclear weapons. What exactly are we supposed to expect will happen in a few hours from now?
Well, I agree with you. It's a very confusing message, and it could be that that's the plan. That is to keep the opposition completely unaware of what's going to take place. And that's what many journalists and news networks around the world are trying to work out what will happen and what will take place. I just got word about 3 or 4 minutes ago from a source very close to Donald Trump himself, who says that negotiations are actually going well. So that's another spanner to throw into the very confusing scenario of what is likely to take place. You had a very, very good introductory, comprehensive outlook as to what is really taking place. Of course, over 50 explosions have been heard on the island itself. There has been many, many bridges, including railway bridges, cut off. What is concerning is the IRGC, who have encouraged parents to bring out their children as young as 12 years old to stand around the energy facilities, which Donald Trump says will be bombed at 5:30 Indian time on a Wednesday morning. So it's really difficult to work out what is taking place behind the scenes. But of course, I do think that the Iranians are really now feeling the pressure. They are probably panicking. That's the Iranian regime, as well as, of course, the people, based on that tweet which we saw earlier on from Donald Trump, which is not very presidential. I think we could all agree on that. But I just want to say that we must stay focused on the objective, and that is to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. That's what this is all about. I believe that Iran was on the brink of getting nuclear weapons.
But J.D. Vance says the military objective has already been achieved. So, I mean, where is the problem then?
Well, he's wrong on that, and I don't mind saying that he is wrong on that. I think there is a lot of confusing messages around. That's probably why a lot of the news networks are broadcasting so many different things. It doesn't help when somebody says something like that, especially if it all goes wrong. The American administration have been quite lucky so far, especially with that amazing amazing operational rescue of the 3 pilots on the ground, and how many were involved. And it could have gone all wrong, as Donald Trump said at his press conference.
Right.
But of course, how it all unfolds in the coming hours, we are...
No, undoubtedly, it's been a
guess.
very daring rescue operation. I think the whole world has been watching that very closely, but that doesn't undo the fact that the threat of widespread violence or wiping out a civilization is not going to raise concerns across the world. Of course, the whole world is very worried because of the implications that it has for the entire world and, of course, for the flow of oil. But let me bring in our guest from Iran. We have Dr. Hamidreza Gholamzadeh. Dr. Hamidreza, how do you respond to the charge of the previous speaker that it's Iran who's panicking by bringing out these children into the protests that are taking place outside the various power stations in Iran? Your response to it?
I like the way the Americans interpret everything, that IRGC is responsible for all the problems in the world. Titanic was run by IRGC. I don't know, the dinosaurs were killed by IRGC. I think everything was done by IRGC. Yes, there are many people going around the power plants, but they are volunteers. We have 90 million people in Iran, which, unlike the United States, they believe in the country, and they are ready to sacrifice their lives for the country, and they are protecting the country. Every single night, they have been in the streets chanting against the American Israelis and the enemies, and supporting the Islamic Republic. So if you want to call them IRGC, yes, Iran has 90 million people of the IRGC, but they are voluntarily going to the places to protect the country. That's how the Iranians work. And actually, President Trump is not the first person who wanted to destroy this civilization. Genghis Khan also tried that, but he failed. And the United States and President Trump will also fail to destroy this civilization. Iranians have been here for thousands of years, unlike the United States, which counts much less than that. And it has been here, and it has a civilization, it will remain. And that's because of this resilience that the Iranians have had. And of course, Iran is not going to bow down to these threats, and is standing very firmly against the Americans. And the Strait of Hormuz will not be open tonight.
Okay, let me bring in Janatan on that. Janatan, Slater, I'd like you to comment on that because at the end of the day, it's our democratic right to protest is what Iranians say. And at the end of the day, whether it's children, youngsters, youth coming out to protest, if they are coming out to protest peacefully, then obviously it will be those who are taking military action who will not look very good. And there's already the case of Mandab that's there before us.
By no means is any demonstration that is pro-regime peaceful. We've seen what they do. Every time there is a affiliated entity with the Islamic Republic, let's talk about their squads that open fire on buildings that are chanting. So let's just get that idea out of the way that anything involving the Islamic Republic is peaceful. Now, going back to the conversation of what is, how are we going to tackle the issue of what President said about attacking a civilization? No one hates Iranian civilization more than the Islamic Republic. They have founded the 1979 revolution to replace Iranian identity with Islamism. And that's a fact. It's not a matter of speculation. You look at their rhetoric, you look at how they're trying to replace every Iranian holiday with an Islamist holiday. So if there's one entity that is out there to destroy Iranian identity, it is the Islamic Republic. If it's one entity that has killed more of its people than any other country in the region recently, it is the Islamic Republic. 40,000 unarmed protesters dead within 48 hours. And now they're using the same tactics, using their own people as a shield. Of course, they're firing missiles from residential areas. Of course, they're going to bring in children to have them either be a human shield or somehow stay where the targeting is going to be. That is their strategy all along. That's what Islamists do. And now the only way you can truly ensure that the issue of nuclear ballistic missiles, they're all removed, you need to ensure that the regime in Tehran will be replaced by a government that is going to be representative of the Iranian people. That is the only way you can achieve a long-term goal here. Any other thing, any other war, if you're going to prolong it, or we're looking at the 12-day war, in all cases, you might just be simply dragging out the problem.
No, but I thought the regime has already been changed because Donald Trump, and I'm quoting what he said earlier today, he says that now that we have a complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary, wonderful can happen. So according to Mr. Trump, the regime has already changed, hasn't it?
Of course, he's going to say that, and that is because he's engaging diplomatically, trying to at least have a short-term solution to the Strait of Hormuz. But his February 28th speech, paired with General Brad Cooper, what Admiral Cooper says, if you look at all of them combined, it is
but I
about
thought Iran said they're not engaging with these talks. They're not going to engage with those who are going to threaten to end their civilization. Isn't that what the Iran government has put out?
Regardless of what they say, backdoor, it might be different. Ultimately, it comes to one point. Iran does not provide concessions, full stop. They are not going to behave any differently compared to any other regime official, full stop. And the ball is now in Washington's court. They need to realize that they have not gotten behavior change, and that's the main issue with the Islamic Republic. They never change their behavior. There's one way out but through.
Yeah, let me bring in Richard Painter on that. Richard Painter, there's no behavioral change. At the end of the day, Iran, is sticking to its guns. And, Iran says that it's going to stop short of nothing but the 10 points that it's put forth if it has to end the war. Richard Painter, who's really at fault here? And who's the one who's, taking it or ratcheting it up at this scale? Because the big question of what the exit ramp is, what the possible gain for the US at the moment at least don't seem to be very clear.
Well, everyone knows that Iran is run by a bunch of crazy people, has been for decades. They just killed tens of thousands of their own people simply for peacefully protesting against the regime. So that's very, very clear. Anyone who stands up for the Iranian regime or thinks that they're decent people running that country is completely insane. The people of Iran, of course, are suffering a great deal for this. Bottom line, though, is this should not be the cause for United States military action. The United States does not have an interest in the region, getting involved in a war, starting to bomb Iran. We went through this last summer with the bombing of the nuclear facilities in Iran when President Trump said he had obliterated the nuclear facilities on social media. And now here we are with a war that's been lasting for, 5-6 weeks. And this could very well destroy the world economy. This is going to have catastrophic results militarily and economically. The United States should not be getting involved in a war in the Middle East simply because Iran is a terrible dictatorship. There are lots of terrible dictatorships indeed in that region. Not one of our allies in the region is a democracy. They're all authoritarian regimes, save Israel. And Israel's prime minister has been indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. This is not a good situation for the United States. President Trump did not have permission from Congress to start this war, which was required under the United States Constitution. We need to put a stop to this insanity. But defending the Iranian regime is just disgusting, absolutely disgusting regime, disgusting people running that country. But the bottom line is the United States should not be going to war. President Trump's in violation of our Constitution and also in violation of international law.
All right, there's some breaking news coming in, gentlemen. Let's quickly put out this information. The U.S. media now reporting that talks between U.S. and Iran have made progress in the last 24 hours, but the ceasefire still looks like it's a long shot at the moment. That's how it appears at the moment, but let's quickly get in Lieutenant General Pandey on this. Lieutenant General Pandey, while those backchannel talks may happen, they may not happen, what really are we looking at in terms of U.S. action? You have, for instance, Marco Rubio coming out to say that nuclear weapons are not going to be used. But when Trump says he's going to end another civilization, is this just bluster? Is this just another threat? And can we expect another U-turn?
So firstly, look, both sides. And, you're listening to both sides. And when you sit onto a fence and you observe what is happening, there'll be always maximalist objectives will be set. The second is when you are going through the process, each side is going to talk that how they're not going to relent till the time they achieve their objective. So when the Iranian stance is about saying that we will fight to our death, and the Americans are going to say that we are going to kill you till the death, this will continue to happen because, however, as you said, there is a pain point for the world, and also the America should not be involved in the war fighting, and Americans, even Iranians, will be wanting peace. So there is a section, and when I read the tweet and the messaging of Trump, it is clear that there's something which is happening, and it is not involving Mustafa, right? So when he says that there is a group which is far less radical and stuff like that, it means there is a segment which is there which wants peace. Something like in US, here you got two panelists. One wants to bomb out, and the second wants that US doesn't require to be there in the region. So there is a group, and anybody may deny it, but in Iran, there's a group which is led by the clergy, and in fact, not even by the clergy, it is by IRGC, because they control the country, and there will be certain political and rational people who will be wanting certain degree of getting away from what's happening, because Iran has been heavily sanctioned. The second part which you have been talking about, that they will bomb them out, and the Iranians are using civilians to let's not take one video out of context by saying that every Iranian leadership is wanting their children to come onto the street and protect their whatever assets. The fact is that when you're dealing with a conventional army, which is #1 of the world, not by far, by a margin, but much a greater distance than from what is Iran, and you have got Israelis joining the force to attack in the conventional manner, the Iranians are going to go asymmetric, right? And that asymmetry will involve, which is a long drawn fight involving the people, and unfortunately every civilian gets killed by an American or Israeli shell is going to only bind the people against the Western powers, or let's say against the American, and it will prolong the war or the conflict. So it's a system in which you need to continue. I'm looking at what is happening. The tweet is very clear on one thing, that there is a significant process, and I just spoke about 2 hours, 3 hours back on your channel, and I've tweeted already. There's a very high chance of a ceasefire coming in the morning at 5:30.
Okay, well, let's hope that happens. Let's hope in the interest of world peace that actually happens.
There are 2 indicators. One is the threat, the way J.D. Vance and everybody has made about bombing them out, right? So there is an element which is being put under pressure. There is a saner element which is engaged to talk. So these are 2 things that are happening. Second is, the last few hours are going to be extremely violent for both sides. Because when you are coming towards a ceasefire, a closure of an operation, you're going to put out your best foot forward to actually destroy each other's military assets, military facilities, or even infrastructure which are going to, because that is how the Iranians are going to hit out to the Gulf countries, because that is where they get it out.
Okay.
They can't
That's the leverage. That's their leverage. That's what the leverage will be at the negotiating table. And is that what's really happening? Let's quickly bring in some of our other panelists as well. And James Marlow, I'd like you to come in on this, because Kharg was seen as a major threshold, a major red line that had been crossed. It's just the second time in the last 40 days or so that there's been an attack on the Kharg island. What is the signaling that's coming out of this? Is the US saying that we are not going to adhere to the traditional red lines such as Kharg Island, and we'll take it even further to other important assets that are very dear and very important to Iran? Is that the messaging that's going out in these last few hours, in your view?
Well, from what I understand, up to 2.5 hours ago, there was more than 50 explosions heard on Kharg Island itself. And that is because that it is a center hub for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So you hit them, you bring down the morale. That is the objective. Of course, they think very differently from the Western mind because they believe in being a shahid, a martyr, and they believe that they have thousands to replace them. As we've seen, generals and top brigadiers, of course, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and dozens and dozens of more high-ranking people have been killed in the last 39 days. That's how long the war has been going. The Iran today is definitely not the same Iran as it was 39, 40 days ago. It's definitely not. It is weak. Is the regime about to fall? Probably at this time, I would stick my neck out and say, no, it's not. It needs somebody to overthrow it, which is going to be the people on the ground. It's not going to be the Americans. It's not going to be the Israelis. And it's not going to be the Arab states, the moderate Gulf Arab states who will land troops on the ground. Eventually, it could be a combination of the Kurds in the north, the Baluchis, the Persians, the Arabs, alongside a breakaway of the IRGC, because I believe that there is parts of the IRGC that are feeding information to the Israeli intelligence. It's just simply unbelievable how the Israelis have managed to pinpoint exact generals and, of course, the Ayatollah on day one. That information has clearly come from a top military and intelligence source on the ground. And I think there are members of the IRGC that may move over to the people, but they want to do it when the time is right.
How many of them will move? There are hundreds of thousands of them, if I'm not mistaken, who are members of the IRGC. You may have taken out a large part of the leadership, but how about all these hundreds of thousands who've been ideologically so devoted?
Well, again, it's very difficult to say. They're the ones who are holding the guns, as President Trump said yesterday in his press conference, and he loves to talk to journalists. He loves to spend so much time. I think this president has spent more time with journalists than any other previous presidents. So he's definitely one of a kind. But as he said himself, that they sent in arms to the people. It went via the Kurds. He didn't mention the word Kurds, but we know previously that he was talking about the Kurds. And the Kurds kept them for themselves. So he's obviously very disappointed about that. He's also said, and I understand that it can be very contradictory with the words and the tweets that come out of Donald Trump's mouth and also his pen or his fingers when he tweets. But on the one hand, of course, he makes a ridiculous tweet like he did several hours ago. And then, of course, he tells the Iranian people, stay indoors. We are bombing IRG sites. We are bombing the military sites. We are taking out its infrastructure. Stay indoors. We want you to stay alive. And I believe that's very much the case. Just one point very quickly.
Let me get in our guest from Iran as well, Dr. Hamidreza Gholamzadeh. I'd like you to come in on this. You know, what is very curious is that Iran's own peace plan, it has given itself the right to charge $2 million from any ship that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, under which international law treaty is Iran, getting this right to itself? It's blatantly illegal for Iran to be even proposing something like this.
It is not illegal because it is the right for territorial waters of every country that can charge for that. So Suez Canal, Panama Canal, they are charging.
In international waters?
No, it's international water. It's Iranian territorial water. 22 kilometers from the border baseline of Iranian waters could be considered territorial water, and Iran is entitled to the right to charge within 40 kilometers of.
But you didn't have any such charge till before the war. There was no such charge till before the war. If it was legal, you would have done it earlier.
Yeah, it was because it was actually exempted from that. Iran and Oman had accepted to be as an exception from the international law for the sake of maritime. And now they need to pay the price for the security of the passage. Why do they pay the same price, some similar price in Suez Canal? Why do they pay some price for Panama Canal? Why do they pay to Turkey for Bosphorus Strait? So that's the point. Iran has the right.
You agree with that argument? Because the only point I'm making is that other countries which are not party to the war, I mean, US, Iran and Israel is one aspect, the Gulf countries is one aspect, but the countries like India, etc., who are not even part of the war in that sense, but they are directly going to get impacted if you charge this kind of a hefty fee. Let me bring in Lt Gen Pandey on that. Lt Gen Pandey, your response to your response to our guest from Iran.
So, firstly, the cost may be exorbitant, which they are talking of. The only challenge is that when you look at the precedent, when there's a man-made canal in which significant expenditure has been made, then taking such a charge from the transiting ships or whatever passes through is acceptable. But when you're moving through the global commons, which is something of nature of a sea, then that doesn't become appropriate. But I will just like to, bat on their side a little bit. While they have not been charging till now, but you see, if a country is down onto one corner, which is totally isolated from the world, except for a few countries actually backing them up in whichever manner, then there comes, and if you look at the damage they have suffered and everything, so there may be a case in point for them to recover a cost to build up their economy, right? And again, when you are going to a negotiating table, when you are being rhetorical in your consideration and talk, So whatever like Trump is saying or the Americans are saying or anybody else who's fighting against Iran is saying, Iran will also take a posture which will be an extreme posture. Eventually, when you're going for a bargaining table and you look at Trump, Trump has a concept of making deals. And he goes on the maximum possible objective or structure which he can do, which is a New Yorkish kind of thing. Right. And this is what Iran will also come out and talk and do about it.
Okay,
but
let's get a quick response from other panelists as well. Janatan, I'd like you to come in on this. This is just a maximalist position that's being taken by Iran because you're at the negotiating table, and this is very much what President Trump also does. Do you agree with that?
No, that is not what the president does. We have to remember, before the 12-day war, the president compromised so much with the regime in Tehran to the point that he was even allowing them to have a consortium to enrich uranium on Iranian soil with other states, and they still rejected that. The issue with the decision makers in Tehran is that they don't realize how many cards they have. They always pursue maximalist ones. They can only agree with a deal that benefits them and not the other side. There is no sense of compromise with the regime in Tehran. And we saw that with the JCPOA, and now we see the opposite of that, of course. They're unhappy that they're not getting what they want. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, it's an extortion policy. The comparison to Panama is frankly absurd because Panama is not attacking different vessels with drones and missiles. That is, I don't even know why that guest is even making the comparison, let alone why they have internet access in Iran, given that there's an internet outage. I have my speculations, but that's a separate issue. So when it comes to how we can negotiate with the regime, it's always about compromise, and Tehran never allows any.
Yeah, okay. Professor Richard Painter, would you like to comment on this?
Well, Iran isn't going to get money, extort money from people in return for not blowing up the ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, that's just crazy. And they ought to stop talking crazy. None of this justifies the United States getting involved in this war between Iran and their neighbors and Israel. The United States needs to get out of this and stop this war. There is no authorization in the United States Congress. There's a violation of international law. But for people to be going around justifying the actions of the government of Iran, acting as if the Iranian people support the government of Iran, that's just absolutely crazy.
All right.
What we need
we'll have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there, Professor Painter. Completely out of time. I'd like to thank you, Richard Painter, Lt Gen DP Pandey, Dr. Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, as well as James Marlow and Janatan Sayeh. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. All eyes on 5:30 in the morning, just a few hours from now, when we'll know what US's decision finally is and whether there will be a further escalation, or are we looking at a potential ceasefire as far as the war in Iran is concerned. Thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen.